Aloha, everybody, and welcome to our October book club, our mental health book club. I am excited to be sharing with you about this month's book, which is Find Your Unicorn Space by Rodsky. Um, so this book is it's incredible. I have loved reading it. I found it incredibly inspiring. And I want to share a little bit about what she is talking about in this book and how I feel like that applies and relates to supporting us as women within, the framework of supporting mental health and wellness. So sort of our agenda today, what I want to share in this training is really how to give yourself permission. And these are some of the tenets of her book, how to give yourself permission to be unavailable to anyone other than you, which I don't know about you guys, but that's more challenging than it sounds. To her second permission slip is to burn guilt and shame to the ground, right? So she talks about how to release that guilt and shame that we sometimes feel when we try to put ourselves first, when we make ourselves unavailable, and then also how to use your voice to ask for what you need from your loved ones so that you can reconnect to your creativity, so that you can combat burnout, you can spark joy, you can reignite and reconnect to your flow. So I want to start with our first reflection prompt. First, also, let me just introduce myself. For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Snyder. I am a licensed clinical social worker, a therapist in private practice, and I am a registered yoga teacher as well as an elite embodiment coach. And I feel very strongly and passionately about really this idea of finding and creating your unicorn space. And I will tell you, so our very first question, in fact, or the first reflection prompt is, after reading this book, Find Your Unicorn Space, what have you identified for yourself? If you have read this book, what have you identified for yourself as your unicorn space? And how do you plan to really take time to incorporate this into your life moving forward? And so I just wanted to share that, for me, the Women's Wellness Circle, creating this online Facebook group during the pandemic, really, it started as my unicorn space. Like I was working full time from home. As you know, I have a toddler, and so I've been home with him and also working full time as a therapist in private practice. And I really created this Facebook group as a safe space to bring women together in sisterhood. And part of why I did that is because I'm finding that so many women are struggling with their mental health, with their wellness, and part of that is due to the pandemic. Part of that is due to a variety of other factors, some of it being the state and chaos of our world. And unfortunately, there's just really limited access to therapy right now and to getting in to see a therapist. And so I created this space really to support women in their mental health, in their wellness, because I'm finding that so many of my female clients are feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling overloaded, and just kind of disconnected from themselves. And part of that is because we're simultaneously playing so many different roles, right, within our families, within our careers. And so I just, that was part of what prompted me to actually turn this into a unicorn space, and use my creativity to kind of cultivate the space. And what's incredible is a year later, so I think I started this in August. The Women's Wellness Circle started in August of 2021, so it was a little over a year ago. And our circle has grown, right, from zero to, I don't know, 500 or more women. And this has become all of a sudden, it's also turned into actually a coaching business for me, where I'm able to support more women in their wellness by integrating the things I love, neuroscience, psychology, and yoga, to really help women, especially those women that are kind of like you guys, ambitious, high performing, kind of also, driven, but mentally exhausted, and help them to sort of transform into these elite and emotionally regulated powerhouses, right? And the way that I have sort of developed, I mean, even just coming into my own kind of co-creation of this process and this space, that has helped me evolve into creating what I'm calling my embodied paradise method. So that women can embody the highest version of themselves, the elite version of themselves. That is what elite embodiment really is. And so for me, my unicorn space has been the Women's Wellness Circle. I mean, I'll be honest, you guys, I do not love social media. I really don't. I was a little hesitant in terms of leaning into this. But I decided it's a way to reach more women. It's a way to bring mental health and wellness support to more people simultaneously. And so I'm trying it out. And it's actually been really fun. Like I've had fun with this, which is, the whole idea of a unicorn space. So I want to talk a little bit about what is that? What does that even mean, a unicorn space? So I'm going to read you a quote from her book. This book is by Eve Rodsky, and I love her, by the way. I heard her on a podcast and I just fell in love with her and I was like, I'm going to read that book. That is going to be on our list. She also wrote a book called Fair Play, which is also on my list to read. I just want to share about that first book that she wrote, which is basically looking at like the division of gender roles and sort of like the labor division among families and specifically like, partners. And she just has a great way, which she incorporates a lot actually into this book, about how to sort of ask your partner, communicate with your partner to carve out time for each other, so that you both can have your unicorn space. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I just wanted to share a little bit about her too. And I think she's even an attorney. That's like I think was her full-time gig before she started writing. But the idea of a unicorn space. So she says, creative self-expression redefined as unicorn space is not optional. Prioritizing creative time for you is essential for your ongoing sense of self, the health of your partnership, and your ability to convey what a full and meaningful life looks like to you and your family and your greater community. In other words, if we want to avoid burning out, opting out, and losing ourselves, then we must set true boundaries by reclaiming the space and time for creative self-expression. So I really love that quote because for me, this idea that creativity is not optional. Like, we sometimes put it on the back burner, or we feel like that's not what society teaches us necessarily to value and prioritize. But it's essential, she's saying, to preventing burnout, to literally supporting your mental health so that you are not losing yourself and you are not like opting out of your life. You want to opt into your life, right? And creativity is sort of an outlet to do that. And so she basically says that there are 3 C's, and I'm going to go through each one, but I'll just summarize them quickly. 3 C's of the unicorn space. The first one is cultivating curiosity. The second one is making meaningful connections, right? Through sort of what she calls purposeful sharing. And then the last one is actually following these creative projects to completion. That's the third C. So I'm going to take it one at a time just to share about this idea of cultivating curiosity, right? So she says, research indicates that the pursuit of meaning that the action of connecting and contributing to something beyond the self, that allows you to feel directed and motivated by a community that shares similar goals may be the true path to happiness. And I have to tell you guys, that is spot on. There's so much research that looks at how actually when we feel happier as human beings when there's a greater sense of meaning in our life, when we feel like we are pursuing something worth pursuing, something larger than ourselves, right? Where there is meaning beyond ourselves. And so she says, and actually this is a quote from, she uses this quote in the book from Professor Laurie Santos, who I believe is the woman that put together and teaches that class in happiness. So like, it's like one of the most famous and well-known classes at Yale, I think, is like the course in happiness, which actually you can take. I don't know if you guys know that you can sign up to take her course, even if you don't go to Yale, which is kind of cool. But she says you can feel happy without a sense of meaning, and you can experience meaning without happiness. But when you have purpose and meaning, you're more likely to be satisfied with your life. And she says, and when you're doing things that engage your purpose and meaning, you're more likely to experience positive emotions like joy. So the whole idea here is that like we want the sweet spot where meaning and happiness sort of overlap, right? And some questions that Eve Rodsky, the author, suggests that we reflect on are the idea of like, so think about for yourself as you're thinking about cultivating curiosity, what do you want more time to explore in your life? If you had like a week of just nothing scheduled and everything was taken care of, what would you want to do at that time, right? Like, what's something you've always wanted to know, you've always wanted to make or develop or learn? Kizzy, I think you're watching. I'd love to hear from you. What is something that you wish you had more time to explore, right? Another question she asks is, what's something that was once interesting and meaningful to you? What is something that has been meaningful to you? What's something that you want to rediscover or get back to, right? Or how could you like hone your curiosity through your values? She has some really cool values exercises in this book, which I appreciated, as a way to think about like, gosh, what do I want to cultivate here? What am I curious about? And really what she's saying is like, if you deny yourself permission to live a creative and meaningful life and fulfilling life, what are you losing? Ultimately, we're losing ourselves, right? If we don't commit to living a more creative, a more meaningful, and a more fulfilling life. So the whole idea here, and this is what I so appreciate, because I can't tell you how many women I talk to that feel like, well, I already went to school in this, and whatever it is I went to school in, or I'm already in this career, like I can't start over, right? But she says, no, give yourself permission to sometimes edit and completely rewrite your narrative, rewrite your story at any stage, any age, or any page of your life. That's a quote from her. And so I really love that. So that's sort of the first step in cultivating and sort of coming up with your unicorn space, is cultivating curiosity. The second piece is making meaningful connections through purposeful sharing. And what she's basically saying is, okay, once we know what that unicorn space is, right, then we want to actually connect it to our community and connect it to our loved ones. So there's lots of ways to do this. Like, she goes into all these different ways, right? We can share by sort of like replicating, evolving traditions, starting new traditions, whether that's within our family, with our loved ones, within our community. We could create legacy projects. These are all sort of what she calls the spin-off share. We can do what she calls the show up and support share, where we're motivated literally by the desire to show up and support. So we, for example, might enlist a friend or a success partner, for example, to join us on our journey. We might join in with a group or with a team or with a class as a way to show up and support each other in our unicorn space. She also calls something she calls this the serendipitous community share, basically meaning that we create a support group or create a space of belonging and healing. I don't know if this sounds familiar, but that's what the Women's Wellness Circle is. The idea of having basically like a gathering of like-minded people, right? Where we can share similar values, we can connect, we can foster empathy, break the ice and realize that we have common ground with each other, and inspire connection and creativity within a communal space, right? So there's lots of ways that we can sort of connect to our community and do what she calls purposeful sharing. She also talks about some other ways, like she calls it the slay it forward share, of like teaching and tutoring and mentoring, inspiring, relaying knowledge and skills. I try to do that in here as much as I can, right? Of really sharing with you guys the skills that I know are beneficial for mental health and wellness. She talks about having a sounding board. So like sharing from that place of like wanting to have a sounding board. So whether that's like being receptive to constructive criticism, embracing opportunities to improve, like almost like a workshopping space, or like kind of like a masterminding space, right? Where we're constantly asking for notes and we're co-creating together. That's one of my favorite things to do. And to be honest, I've found a lot of value in working with other coaches who I can mastermind with and connect with and share ideas with in that way, around sort of my unicorn space of this women's wellness circle. She also talks about two other shares, the service share and the showcase share. And she says the service share is really motivated by literally giving back. So volunteering, delivering goods, supplies, organizing like drives, running local like charities or church groups, aiding with like community fundraisers or school fundraisers, right? So there's so many ways to do that service share, to give back to your community through your unicorn space. And then even just like showcasing into the community. So hosting a house party to reveal whatever your hidden talents are to your family, or connecting to other people through your skills, surprising other people with this more fuller version of yourself. I mean, I'll be honest, you guys, like it took a lot of courage for me to kind of be willing to put this out there. I had no idea how this, women's wellness circle was going to be received. This idea of me, kind of not just being a therapist, but also being a coach and moving into that space. I didn't know how that was going to be received by my community, but I really felt motivated to create connection and to create safe spaces. And I just decided to risk it and put it out there. And actually, I felt very supported in this. But, it is a risk. It certainly is a risk when we share with our community, but that's also what builds meaning. And that's where the growth happens, is when we take risks, right? So she talks about how creativity plus connection is what creates this kind of like alchemy, where whatever we're creating expands. That's actually a quote by Mia Birdsong. But in this book, she says it's a light bulb moment when you realize, once you've identified a value-based curiosity of something you actively want to pursue, which is like your what, that's your unicorn space, right? And how far you want to take it, which is like your when, along with your intrinsic motivation for getting there, which is really the why, like the thing that's motivating you. So for me with the space, like I wanted to be able to reach more women. I wanted to be able to support more women in their mental health, in their wellness, beyond just like sort of working with, therapy clients in Hawaii one-to-one. That was my why, right? And so she says, then once you have identified these things, then you can determine how and in what type of environment you plan to share it, which is your where, right? How do you want to do this? Where do you want to do this? And this is how she says you arrive at your unicorn space. So she really walks you through in this book. She really walks you through sort of different like practices, some journaling exercises, values exercises that are so helpful in identifying what your unicorn space, like what is the what, the when, the why, and the where, really, and the how of creating your own unicorn space. So she does talk about sort of this third piece. So if you remember the 3 C's, right, we've talked about the first piece, which was cultivating curiosity, the second piece, which was making meaningful connections through personal sharing, and then the third piece of sort of this unicorn space is the idea of following our creative projects through to completion. And this part is kind of cool and interesting because she talks about throughout the book the obstacles to completion, and there's a lot of them, right? If you think about, reasons why maybe you put your creative ideas on the back burner or to the side, right? Time is a big one. Many of us have what she calls toxic time messages that keep us limited to believe we don't have enough time to create a unicorn space of our own, right? Or she says uncertainty. So uncertainty might be meaning that like, if we're defining success as like being the best, we have to make it perfect, for example, or we don't know what the future holds. And that uncertainty is kind of creating anxiety and stopping us from even trying. That's a big obstacle. Sometimes an obstacle is partner support, not feeling like our partner is supportive in the process of, setting aside time for your unicorn space. I'm going to walk you through some sort of like do's and don'ts of how to enlist your partner, basically, so that you can carve out that time. And then the other piece is fear. So she talks about fear as sort of like the greatest action inhibitor. And, obviously like these questions that come up for all of us. What if I fail? What if I don't finish? What if other people judge me? What if other people reject me? What if it's too late? What if I don't meet my own expectations? What if, right? And so, yes, that is normal. We all experience fear. But what she's suggesting is that we actually want to lean into the fear and we want to tap into our resilience. She calls it tap into like your superhero narrative, meaning you don't have to be fearless. Actually, what we want is to learn how to be adaptable in the face of fear. And so her suggestion is to create sort of these like connection coalitions to support you on your journey towards, establishing your unicorn space. And she says one way to sort of, push through the fear is by like creating rituals of discomfort. And I absolutely agree with this, that if you're someone who gets stuck in fear, we want to actually learn to build what's called distress tolerance. We want to learn how to lean into the fear gradually. So we literally create some rituals where we experience discomfort, starting small, not starting with like the biggest thing, but starting with something that creates a little bit of discomfort. And then we learn how to sit through that. And we learn how to breathe through that. And we learn that we are adaptable and we can push through the fear, right? And so that's the idea. She talks about these rituals of discomfort to sort of step through the fear, right? And then this one stuck with me. She said, complete is better than perfect. I love that so much, right? Because so many people don't get started on things because we think that it's got to be perfect or else I can't even get started. No, her whole thing is just get yourself to a place where you're moving towards completion. And what she says is that actually it doesn't have to be like, when do we ever arrive at completion? It's like kind of this ongoing journey, right? We are all a work in progress. We are all a work in process. And so rather than focusing on an outcome like a product, instead, we want to like focus on small markers of completion along the way, right? And like sort of make these small steps like almost like an everyday practice. So her big thing is that your unicorn space does not have to be something that you like devote hours and hours to each week or each day. She's saying like you can spend a few minutes a day on your unicorn space, literally like just a little bit of time, and then celebrate those small steps, right? And she talks about being, this idea of complete is better than perfect. That for me sparked this thing, something that I say a lot to my clients, which is focus on being brave over perfect, right? Like focus on the bravery, then the courage that it takes to lean into, I'm going to say failure, but what is failure, right? Like lean into just trial and error, making mistakes, like learning as you go. That's the whole thing. And so one of the things I appreciate too, each chapter, she sort of gives these like permission slips. So she says, I give myself permission to be in a lifelong pursuit of creativity, which I love that. I thought that was such a great way to say that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these permission slips, because the second sort of question that I want us to touch on is really, so Find Your Unicorn Space outlines these, she calls them the 3 Ps, these rules of permission, right? Permission to be unavailable, permission to burn guilt and shame, and permission to use your voice, right? And so the question is, I'll go through these 3 a little bit deeper. Is there one rule that you could see being difficult for you of those 3 Ps, right? And if so, which one is it? And then I wonder, how do you plan to overcome that block that you have, right? So let's talk about permission to be unavailable. This is a huge one. So many women, especially women that are mamas and working mamas, right? Very busy, that often it's so hard to give ourselves permission to carve out time and space for us because we feel obligated to take care of everyone else, right? And so what she's saying is we have to give ourselves permission to carve out time so that we have this mental freedom, this space to tap into our most creative self. And this is where she says flow happens. When you carve out time for yourself, this is where it's kind of like flow is like a psychological term that really is like this place where time stands still. It's almost like play for adults, for grown-ups, where we literally just, I don't know if you've ever had that experience of being in the flow. It's like you kind of lose all orientation of time and space because you are just in it. You are doing your thing and time and space doesn't really matter. You are just in the zone, in the flow. And that is such an incredible place to be. And actually cultivates that cultivates a lot of happiness and joy, right? So she says, when you give yourself permission to be unavailable and to recognize that you have a right to your own valuable time, a magical thing happens. You are granted mental freedom, available headroom, space to think, sustained attention to focus on something you love. And she tells these really funny stories throughout the book where she literally, like at one point, had to put a post-it on herself that said unavailable to her family. And even the post-it did not stop like her children or her husband from coming in and asking a million things when she was trying to carve out time and space to write this book. And so she walks through sort of how she laid out boundaries with her family in a way that is totally loving and still supportive, but basically that's her saying, no, I need time and space for me. So she says the path forward to a more fulfilling life is yours when you commit to reframing how you value your time and then intentionally reprioritize some for you. Strike down the toxic time messages that compromise your choices and begin to think about creating intentional boundaries to protect your time, to protect your space, and to protect your flow. I love that so much. This idea of protect your time, protect your space, and protect your flow. And I want to point out, I mean, she does in this book talk about how unicorn space is a privilege, like having the time and space. And so there are many communities and people that simply don't have that time and space for all kinds of reasons. She talks about sort of the systemic oppression of Black, Indigenous, and person of color, and how the challenges that are there around, creating this unicorn space as a result of all of society's limitations and all of the like, you know, uh, racial oppression and all the various things that do cultivate fear and make it really difficult to carve out this time and space. And so she does acknowledge that, but she says, it's still important to reflect on and ask yourself, how do I value my own time, right? How can I begin to create time and space boundaries, whoever you are, wherever you are, right? What would an uninterrupted day, or if you don't have that, what would even just like one free hour look like to yourself if you had that, right? And then can you repeat to yourself, I give myself permission to be unavailable? And sometimes that is like the hardest thing. It's just giving ourselves permission to say no to other people, right? Is sometimes one of the hardest things. Um, so a couple of other questions. She talks about this idea. This was our third question, is if you take her pop quiz of Are You a Giving Tree on page 91 of the book. And she talks about basically like, if your answers are that when you answer this question, making myself available to accommodate the needs of my partner, my family, my friends, my colleagues at the cost of neglecting myself makes me feel, and then she lists a bunch of things. So if she says, if you say that makes you feel noble, righteous, generous, valuable, purposeful, sacrificial, selfless, depleted, resentful, unrecognizable to myself, angry, right? Like if you are in that sort of some of those answers in that range, that you may be this like giving tree that's like overproducing. You are, giving too much, you're over giving, right? And so instead you want to be a tree that sets healthy boundaries, that isn't like that book, The Giving Tree, and says no, and actually burns the guilt and the shame that comes from saying no. And so that's sort of her second permission slip, is giving yourself permission to burn the guilt, which she says, she kind of uses Brene Brown's definition of guilt is like that belief I did something bad, whereas shame is the belief that I am bad. It's more of sort of this character, like almost like, I don't want to say character assassination, but it's like this belief that basically not just did I do a bad behavior, but I am the thing that I'm feeling badly about, as if that's who you are. And that's part of why shame is so much harder sometimes to release than the guilt. But she says we have to reframe our narrative around equity of time and around the individual right to personal time choice, right? So instead of, her suggestion, which I love, is instead of I feel guilty when, she says, reframe it. Say, I made this choice because blank, right? So when we recognize that, rather than being in that place of like, I feel guilty about this thing. No, I made a choice, and I made this choice because. So she's basically saying, don't apologize for your choices. Really know your why and own that, right? So in the absence of that guilt and shame, how might you feel? She actually went on this whole like tour for her book. I think she called it the fuck mom guilt world tour. And she had an amazing turnout because so many women and moms can identify with that idea of mom guilt, feeling badly for making time for ourselves, right? And so she says, when I choose to spend time in my unicorn space, I feel proud, I feel accomplished, I feel fulfilled and gratified and content and delighted and respected and worthy. And so reframing that idea that you are not this endless giving tree, right? So repeat this, she says, once a day. I will not feel guilt or feel shamed about how I choose to spend my time. I will assert time and space for me. I love that. I will assert time and space for me. So then she talks about the third P, right? So again, remembering that these three Ps are the permission to be unavailable, the permission to burn guilt and shame, and the permission to use your voice. And this is a big chunk of the book. She talks about how to use your voice to ask for the time, the creative time that you require. So she basically says how you voice your needs is key, right? That often like miscommunication or a lack of communication prevents us from pursuing our creative self, our creative life, right? And some of the don'ts, right? Like in terms of how not to communicate with your partner, she goes on a whole thing. This is our fourth reflection prompt is if you take her pop quiz in the book, what is your communication style on page 106? So she talks about like all how these different communication methods that sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing with our partner, right? And she's asking, what is your style and what is your partner's style, or how do you think your partner would describe your style, and do they match up? So I'll give you some examples of these sort of like communication don'ts. These are like miscommunication styles. That would be like being long-winded, giving like this one-sided monologue to your partner, or giving sharp like drill sergeant commands, right? Like stop interrupting me, or bad timing is one. So basically like not really giving your partner a heads up, but just being like, hey, I gotta go. See you later, and going off to do your unicorn space. That's not going to go over well, right? Toxic word choice is one. So that's the whole like, are you effing insane? You did what? Like throwing in sort of those bombs, right? That's never going to go well. They're going to get defensive, and that's the end of that. Being what she calls a verbal assassin, meaning that we're using words that are meant to be hurtful, but in like a kind, measured tone. So like saying things that are like kind of overtly not kind, but saying it in a really nice smiley voice or tone. That's the verbal assassin. The all or nothing, which is a huge one, I see this often with my clients, is using always or never statements. So that's the whole idea of like, we're either always this way or never this way. So you always take time for yourself. You never think about me. You never do the dishes. Like that is never going to go over well. One, because you're pointing a finger at the person, but two, because you're using these like kind of exaggerated, polarizing statements that are going to make them immediately get defensive. Dredging up the past is another one. She talks about like basically, bringing up, so you're in the present moment having a conversation or an argument with your partner, but you go to the past. So that's like, this is just like that last time when you did XYZ. No, we want to stay in the present moment. We don't want to bring in past issues. So a couple other miscommunication sort of errors, so to speak, or styles. She calls it the boiling over. So this is like the part of you that maybe stayed silent and is like, oh, well, I didn't say anything, but now I'm pissed. And then you like boil over, or you're already boiled. Like you've been silent, you've stayed silent, and then you just like explode. So that's the like, that's it, I'm out. And you just, totally explode on your partner. Or avoidance, right? Which is basically like, rather than risking the fight, you just totally stay silent. You put in your earbuds, you like sneak out of the room or out of the house, you avoid the conflict, or you completely dismiss what they're saying and you just immediately put up a wall. No, none of those are probably going to go over very well with your partner if we're trying to enlist them on our team to be able to carve out time and space within our family, right? And so what she says instead is these are some conversation do's rather than the don'ts. Rather than creating what she calls a zero-sum dynamic, where it's basically like a tit for tat competition, keeping score. Well, you got, 3 hours on this day of your own time. What about me? What time do I get? That's going to get you nowhere, right? Instead, we want to work towards a non-zero sum, meaning collaboration with our partner. So literally coming together to collaborate and invite them into sort of this like communication or communicative container where we can collaboratively dialogue about our unicorn space. So her suggestions are, and I totally echo these as a therapist, check in regularly with your partner. Like, so as you guys are having this conversation, you want to make sure that you are checking in to see how they're feeling as you're talking about this. You want to kind of mind your tone and just listen to what they have to say, right? So that we're not coming off as like condescending, we're not coming off in, any of those communication styles I just mentioned. You also want to like give yourself permission to pre-negotiate or even renegotiate the division of labor that you and your partner have worked out, and childcare, so that you each can have sort of this creative time and space for your unicorn space. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, well, definitely read the book. She does talk about some ideas for that, but she also, I would encourage you to consider reading her other book, Fair Play, which is all about division of labor with partners. And the biggest thing there is really coming to like an agreement where both partners are equal, where you have a shared and an equal amount of time to be working on whatever it is you want to be working it on, right? So the biggest piece of that, and communicating with your partner to enlist them so that you can carve out this time and space, is to clarify and share your why. What is the why behind your unicorn space, right? And how does it make you feel when you are able to be in that place, right? And then listen to your partner's why, right? So giving your partner permission to also share about whatever the thing is that they want to do, that their creative endeavors, and what is the why behind that, right? And then you want to, after you've sort of told your story, shared your why, you want to stick to your story, right? So don't get into and take on somebody else's narrative, or your partner's narrative. Like, be in your own experience and your own story, right? And give yourself permission to use your voice and tell your story to your partner. Explain to them why this matters to you so much, right? And I'll be honest, like, my husband and I have had to have that conversation on multiple occasions where I am really letting him know what it is that I'm doing here. When I'm spending a lot of time on my computer, or I, on a weekend, am carving out some time to be able to, I tend to like spend my time on the weekend, maybe an hour or so, just batching out my posts, thinking about what do I want to write. And I need that like time and space to be able to just kind of like think, right? And so my husband knows, like, he takes over, and we sort of have this, this agreement where, like, I take Saturday mornings, or he takes Saturday mornings, I take Sunday mornings. Like, we take turns in terms of where we who's like watching our child, and how we delineate, and even just like with general household tasks too. Like, I'm in charge of morning, he's in charge of evening. Like, I do breakfast, he does dinner. So coming up with sort of some agreements where you feel like it's shared. If you are doing everything in your family, it is going to be very difficult for you to manage your family, your career, and just like your own time, your own unicorn space. And so she really, Eve Rodsky, encourages you to support others, enlist the support of others in creating this. And she does talk about this concept of a zombie relationship. So she says, have you ever been, or are you currently in a zombie relationship? And if so, share your experience, and what are you planning to do to sort of reclaim your brain space and your creative space? So a zombie relationship, she says, is basically one in which your partner is like dimming the shine of the other partner by being resentful, by being angry, by being unsupportive, right? And that kind of relationship conflict consumes our brain space, and it makes it very difficult to even have that time and space for creativity. And so the opposite of that is really like having a more like open, personal, vulnerable, intimate relationship with our partner, where we can, like, where our partner is like championing us, right? And in an ideal world, our partner is like really lending that uplifting support to us as we're pursuing our unicorn space. So I'll give you an example. Tonight is this like award ceremony thing. I was nominated for this Women's Fund of Hawaii, this mentor award. And that meant time and space that I've got to take away from my family to go to that tonight. But even though my husband's not feeling well, he was like, absolutely. What, should we get you flowers? Like, what do we do? Like, he's championing me, and how good that makes me feel, and how appreciative I am. And it's not always been that way, I'll be honest, but we've worked towards that. We continue to communicate. So it's this idea of like reframing the value of time to go from me to we, right? Like, how can we do this? We are a partnership. We are a team. How can I support you? How can you support me, right? So ask for and allow for this equal time that you both have to work on the things that matter to you, and don't judge your partner for the thing they're doing with their time. So I'll be honest, like, I don't understand why my husband loves video games, but it's his way of recharging. So I don't judge it. That's his time. And you know what's cool is, like, he comes up with all kinds of creative endeavors that he wants to do during that like mindless video game time. I don't judge it. That's his time, right? And then I do my thing. So whatever that is for you, it's like, just give yourself permission to, like, you do you, but ask your partner, connect with your partner, make sure that they are not a zombie partner, that they are supporting you in a way that is allowing you to feel connected and supported. If this is something you struggle with and you and your partner, I mean, there's multiple issues that can come up in a partnership. I have lots of tools and resources. Let me know, reach out, and certainly I can connect you and give you some ideas for books to read or some other tools that you can use with a partner. But read this book. Like she walks you through. She even has like, I forget what she calls it, but she has like a little blurb on how to talk to your partner and like literally word for word how to have that conversation about unicorn space. So I'd love to hear for you if you're watching this and or whether you're watching it live or you're catching the replay. I would love to know if you have a unicorn space. Drop it in the comments, or if you're just thinking about it and if there's something you're contemplating, right? Like one of the things I want to just mention is that your unicorn space does not have to be like a six-figure business. That is not what it's about, right? Your unicorn space is a place where we have some intention, even just for a couple minutes at a time, to do something that we enjoy outside of our obligations as a partner, a parent, or a professional, right? So this whole idea of like giving ourselves permission to reclaim and discover and nurture our natural gifts and interests that make us uniquely you and combat burnout and reconnect us to the experience of joy and flow. And so the whole idea is that our unicorn space, we want it to be fun, joyful, empowering, rejuvenating, reconnecting, creative, intentional. So your unicorn space could be writing, could be drawing, painting, knitting, cooking, baking, gardening, singing, studying astrology, learning mixology, narrating a children's audiobook. I mean, it's endless. Whatever it is that you feel called to, something that sparks joy for you, that is the unicorn space, right? That is maybe what you want to try to cultivate time and space for within your own life. And I would love, love, love to hear from anyone who either thinks they know what their unicorn space is, or if you are struggling to come up with that, what's preventing you from having that unicorn space? Feel free to drop that in the comments so that we can message each other. I can help support you in that, right? And I wonder if you have connected with the unicorn space at one time or another, how does that change your emotional and your physical state? I know for me that like when I feel connected to a purpose larger than myself, that is when I'm in my flow. That is me at my elite, at my best self, because I know my gifts and I know what I'm able to give to people. And I know that when I am connecting with others and bringing people together in community, that is my unicorn space. And that makes me feel so much joy, right? So if this speaks to you, if you are longing to learn how to give yourself permission to be unavailable, to burn guilt and shame, to use your voice, drop unicorn in the comments and I will reach out to you so that we can explore how I can support you in finding and creating your unicorn space. And we can look at sort of your wellness as a whole and identify what's working, what's not working, how might my embodied paradise method be able to support you in that, right? And that way you can sort of elevate into an elite version of yourself, right? That is my unicorn gift, if you will. And so I just really appreciate you guys watching this and being here with me. And I absolutely hope that I can support you in, really like finding that sort of magical unicorn potential, elite potential that's within you. And I hope you guys have a fabulous Aloha Friday and weekend. And again, if this in any way sparks some interest for you, just drop unicorn in the comments. I will reach out and we can connect. All right. Thank you guys so much. Hope you have a beautiful day and a beautiful weekend. Aloha.